Now, the most live, local talk with the Girvin and Ferlazzo Law Show.
James and I have been asked to help some of the people up in Hoosick, so we're going to chat about some of the hysteria and the hoopla, and really, what are the legal issues there, and also what is the illegal advertising stuff? I mean, that seems to have gotten out of control. Bringing Aaron Brockovich in and that type of grandstanding. I don't know, if people appreciate that or if that's just, sensationalism. But we'll chat about both the legal advertising. Is it going too far? And then the substance. We'll talk about things that we've done in our representation of people with water wells and stigma and certiorari cases. It's way more complicated than just simply, going up there, signing up people and hoping. It's not a lottery. It's a long road, and you have to understand it. And if you think it's a lottery or get-rich-quick scheme, you're absolutely wrong. There are people who will fight tooth and nail. One of the things I'm going to talk about with the Hoosick thing specifically in mind is what is the time frames that you have. Normally it's 3 years. Right. And there's people who may have ingested things more than 3 years ago, and now I'm going to go over the statute of limitations as we chat today about what they have to do. There's a discovery statute which says, okay, I just learned about it, but you have a due diligence period. If you knew or should have known that you had a connection with the exposure, the latent exposure, then you have an obligation to get moving. So it raises a lot of issues. James, you did some research for us, and what did you find in terms of the science up there with respect to the Hoosick PFOA? I mean, it's not just. I guess this is a chemical which has been the subject of lawsuits in the past, right?
It has, which I think is basically, from my understanding, and obviously I'm not a scientist or anything like that. I went to law school specifically because it wasn't necessarily my forte, but it's basically PFOAs are, it's a chemical that's been used in various household products. Think of a non-stick pot and pan. Teflon. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And it had been used since, I want to say, the 1940s or so, and for decades upon decades, and only somewhat recently has it become had companies and others become aware that there's that chemical can cause adverse health effects in human beings. In fact, some of the long-term science on that is still a little bit up in the air, but it does seem there is at least a pretty good correlation between human ingestion and thyroid problems, liver problems, even maybe some heart problems, and a higher incidence of cancer in humans who ingest it. So essentially what's happened in the past, and unfortunately Hoosick isn't the only place that this has happened, is where it's gotten to above acceptable levels in a water supply, where people are ingesting it on a daily basis.
Okay, regular basis.
They are unaware to them, where over time, this isn't something that takes place. You're exposed to it for a week, and all of a sudden it's a radiation poisoning. But over years and years of exposure to this, it can manifest itself in a lot of different ways.
So one of the things, I guess, was your research found was higher risks of bladder and kidney cancers, and the cancer connection between chemicals and exposure to chemicals is tricky, folks. I mean, cancer can be caused by lots of different things. We've had some recent. We had the death of the former Court of Appeals judge, Judge Kay, on lung cancer when she didn't smoke, and so it's a difficult, cause and effect relationship to prove, and that's really one of the hardest things here. The PFOAs, even if they are ingested, take time, and that is something which you just don't know, whether or not you have an illness, and you may need what's called medical monitoring. So a lot of people, most people who are injured in a car accident, they break their arm, they break their leg, they have a concussion. There's a direct causal relationship between the two. And even then, if they had a prior high school football injury, the defense firm will blame it on that. But here, you've got a whole different situation. So New York State, in anticipation, because, chemical exposure is not something that It just happened yesterday. Years ago, the legislature changed the exposure rules. Under CPLR Section 214C, it deviated from the normal 3-year period we talk about all the time, where you've got 3 years from the date of the incident. Let's say you have a dump site, and 3 years generally from the time the dump site was created. But the statute, the legislature has said that notwithstanding the other provisions of law, the 3-year period within which to recover damages for personal injury caused by, quote, the latent effects of exposure to any substance or combination of substances must be commenced from the date of discovery of the injury by the plaintiff or the date, here's the tricky part, folks,
right,
quote, or from the date when, through the exercise of reasonable diligence, such injury should have been discovered, whichever is earlier. So before publicity, maybe you didn't know. Maybe you just thought you were sick. But because of the avalanche of publicity right now, I really think that 3-year period is going to be starting. So people have to be conservative. If you think you have a problem, you really should, number one, go to a doctor. The legal issues are always interesting, but, go to your doctor, get tested, make sure you can, see if there's any, physical things you can do to protect yourself. That's the number one thing you do. It's not calling your lawyer. The first thing you do is you call your doctor.
As much as you might want.
As much as you may think or people tell you to, go get a doctor, get that immediate help. But at the same time, have your legal rights evaluated, because there's no fee here. And this is really the bargain of the law. I mean, a lot of lawyers on the hourly rate cases are expensive, and people cannot afford lawyers in many cases. But on the personal injury front, and this is just one example of the personal injury that we do and other firms do, it's done on a contingency basis, because if there are damages, the contingency basis will cover that. And that's something which we can talk more about as well. But there's a period that you have to follow. And also, if it's a suit against a municipality, and if anybody is contemplating notice of claims, we saw one on the news today against, I guess, the county of Schenectady or something for the jail issue. That's a provision which also has a very short time frame. That's also extended by this. But there is no benefit to waiting. So if there's a concern that a municipality failed to act on a timely basis, was negligent, you need to file what's called a notice of claim to bring a case against them. And that's something which, again, that does make sense to see an attorney quickly, because that time period, usually it's anywhere from 90 days, sometimes less, but 90 is generally the time period. It's extended also under Section 214C. But defense attorneys will find ways to say, well, that really didn't apply, and they're going to find any humanly way possible to avoid that. So what you need to do, folks, is to protect yourself, get the medical treatment immediately, and then at the same time, look at your legal rights, and you can shop around and talk to more than one law firm, see who you feel is best. Hoosick is a good example of a nuisance. What is a nuisance? A nuisance is a substantial interference with the use and enjoyment of your property. So there's private nuisances, which are, one area may have a individual dump site that has nothing to do with, the company up there. Was it Saint-Gobain or
Yep.
Saint-Gobain. It may be a different dump that was put there by someone else. Who knows? And that could be a private nuisance. It only affects a few people. But when you have a large group of people, similar to what we have here, in the town of Hoosick, you have what's called a public nuisance, which affects the public broadly. And you can bring an action for a private nuisance or a public nuisance. And the damages depend on, whether it's personal injury and or property damage. And property damages can be temporary. For example, some of the banks have failed or refused to put up hold mortgages.
Right.
But what if you have a mortgage? Or what if you're trying to sell your house, which is the harder part? You've got to be careful because there's a stigma. And the cases I've been involved in, and the cases both in water contamination, and I had a recent one I settled downstate with respect to sewer contamination, where sewage went right through the person's whole basement.
Oh,
had a sports bar, and it just literally it backed up because of a municipal water problem. Somebody broke a pipe, and all the stuff went right into his house, and he cleaned it up. But that stuff doesn't clean up well, and the fact is the house was tainted. It had a even with the cleanup, the community knows that this is the house that was full of whatever. But some people say I am sometimes. But and that we settle the case based on stigma loss. But there's a certain question of, is it temporary? Is it permanent? Those are all the issues that are involved in nuisance law. So there's also a question of what's called trespass. If the chemicals migrate onto your land, that's the worst case scenario for the people up there.
Yes.
Because it's one thing, for the cleanup to be on someone else's land, and then all of a sudden it migrates onto yours, and you need some water tests to make sure that doesn't occur, because then your land could be contaminated forever, and it's valueless. It's a negative. No one will ever buy it. And technically, under the Superfund laws, you are responsible to clean up your property if there's contamination on it. So there's some negative implications people have with respect to well contamination, water contamination. So what you want to do is try to push that liability over to deeper pockets. Whether that's the government or whether that's private industry. Or whether it's people that nobody's even identified yet. So this is a very complicated area, and it's just something that you just don't play with it. You really have to have thought it out carefully, and I just hope that people up in Hoosick are taken care of, and that they, first of all, solve that problem. Secondly, get that medical reviews to make sure they're not harming themselves any further, and then third, at that point, see whatever rights they have. We've enjoyed doing this show with you. This has been our 15th year. Our anniversary is September, I think it's 17th or something. We'll do something special for that. But we hope you've enjoyed our 701st show, or approximately. James, thanks for coming in.
Oh, of course, Sal.
And Gideon, you're the best. Thank you for sharing and helping out with the executive duties. Folks, this is Sal Ferlazzo, James Girvin, here on Talk 1300.
This is an attorney advertisement.